I am Noah, son of Lamech, father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what I am about to tell you. I did not want to remember this. For decades after the waters receded and the dove returned with the olive branch and we stepped out onto dry ground, I tried to let the memory of what I had seen before the flood simply sink beneath the surface of my mind, the way everything else had sunk beneath those waters. But it did not sink. It stayed. And what I saw in the years before God spoke to me, what walked the earth, what breathed the air of the world that was, it is not what most people imagine when they hear the word. The world has argued about the Nephilim for thousands of years. Giants, they say. Fallen angels, they say. Ancient heroes. But none of those words carry the full weight of the truth. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is not a legend. I lived beside it. Let me take you back to the world before the flood. Not the world as people imagine it, some primitive, muddy place of ignorance and darkness. No, the world before the waters was ancient and sophisticated in ways that would unsettle you. There were cities with walls. There were kings and hierarchies of power. There were craftsmen and musicians and those who worked bronze and iron, just as the account of my forefather Lamech's line in Genesis records. The earth was not empty. It was full of people and full of noise and full of an energy that had curdled from something originally beautiful into something deeply, irreparably wrong. The sacred text says it plainly, though its plainness is deceptive. The earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. That word, violence, in the tongue of my people, the word Hamas, does not only mean the striking of a fist. It means the systematic shattering of the order God established. It means a world where the powerful consumed the weak without restraint, where covenants and boundaries meant nothing, where the image of God in every human being was treated as worthless. This was the atmosphere I breathed every day of my life before the ark, and most people, when they read my story, skip past that atmosphere entirely and jump straight to the boat. They want to count the cubits. They want to debate how the animals fit. But if you do not understand the world that made the flood necessary, you will never understand what the Nephilim were, and you will never understand the weight of what God asked me to carry. Now here is where the misconception takes root. When people hear Nephilim, they reach immediately for the spectacular. They picture enormous thundering monsters, creatures of obvious visible evil that any sane person would flee from. And so the question that naturally follows is, why did so few people listen? Why did the world continue as if nothing was wrong? If these beings were so obviously terrible, so obviously a sign of catastrophic corruption, why were they not universally feared and rejected? That question contains the real mystery, and the answer is darker than any image of a giant. I was a young man, still carrying the smoothness of youth in my face, though the weight of the world was already pressing on my shoulders, when I first encountered one of them. Not in a field of battle, not in some nightmare vision. I saw one of them in a marketplace, standing among men, trading, speaking, laughing even, and the people around him were not running. They were drawn to him. That is the detail that never left me. They were drawn to him. The Nephilim, and the word itself, in our ancient understanding, carries the sense of those who have fallen, or those who cause others to fall, were the offspring born of a mingling that was never meant to be. The sons of God had looked upon the daughters of men and found them beautiful, and taken them as they chose. I have wrestled all my life with the full meaning of that passage, and I will tell you what my spirit understood, standing in that world, breathing that air. Something that belonged to a higher order of creation had crossed a boundary God had drawn. And what came from that crossing was not simply large. It was wrong in a way that was almost impossible to articulate, like a note played in a chord where it does not belong, a sound that your ear cannot immediately identify as false, but that leaves you deeply, inexplicably unsettled. And they were powerful. Not merely in the physical sense, Though yes, they stood above ordinary men in stature, their frames carrying a density and presence that made the air around them feel different. The historian your world knows as Josephus, writing long after my time, preserved the memory that the bones of the Nephilim were displayed in his era as curiosities, their scale defying easy explanation. But their power was not merely in bone and muscle, it was in their capacity to shape the world around them. They became the mighty ones, the men of renown. They built, they ruled, they inspired devotion, and they carried within them an appetite for dominion that was insatiable. This is what I watched for years before God spoke. I watched the Nephilim become the organizing principle of the corrupted world. Entire communities formed their lives around proximity to these beings, seeking their protection, their favor, their blessing. They became, in the eyes of the people, something worthy of reverence, something almost divine. And that was the deepest horror, not their size, not their violence. The horror was the spiritual gravity they exerted. They pulled human hearts away from the Creator and toward themselves. They made the worship of power feel natural, feel inevitable, feel like wisdom, and I stood apart from it. My family stood apart from it, and I will tell you plainly, it was not easy. There was no comfort in standing apart. There was isolation and mockery and the slow, grinding pressure of a world that looked at my devotion to the Lord as the foolishness of a man who did not understand how things truly worked. And then God spoke to me, and what he said both broke me and remade me. He told me he was going to bring the waters, and he told me why in a single sentence that I have turned over in my mind for the rest of my life. He said the earth was filled with violence through them, through the Nephilim, through what their existence had done to the moral and spiritual fabric of the world they inhabited. Here is the revelation that I need you to receive. The Nephilim were not simply a supernatural anomaly, a strange footnote in the ancient record. They were the ultimate expression of what happens when the created order is deliberately inverted, when power is seized rather than given, when the boundaries God establishes between different orders of creation are treated as obstacles rather than as the loving architecture of a God who knows what he made and why he made it. The corruption they embodied was not merely physical, it was theological. It was a living declaration that the will of the creature was sovereign over the word of the Creator, and that declaration, once it became the organizing principle of an entire civilization, made redemption within that civilization impossible. The text of Genesis says that every intention of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil continually, not occasionally, continually. The Nephilim had not merely corrupted the earth, they had colonized the imagination of humanity. They had made evil feel like the natural order of things, and God grieved. That is the detail that silences me even now. The Lord was grieved to his heart. The ancient word carries the full weight of anguish. The God who created the stars and set the boundaries of the sea. He grieved, because what he had made in love and in hope had been twisted into something that he could only describe as a wound upon the earth. And his response to that grief was not rage, though he had every right to rage. His response was a decision to preserve, to find the one man and the one family in whom the image he had placed in humanity still burned clearly, and to carry that flame through the catastrophe, to the other side, to a new beginning. The Nephilim were washed away. Their bones went down into the deep, but the memory of them remained, because God wanted us to remember, not to terrify us, but to warn us. Because the spirit they embodied, the spirit of power worshipped for its own sake, of created things elevated above the Creator, that spirit did not drown with them. It re-emerged on the other side of the flood in slower, subtler, more patient forms. And it is still here, in your world, in the things your generation is tempted to revere above God. Let me speak to you plainly across all these centuries. The lesson of the Nephilim is not a lesson about ancient monsters. It is a lesson about what happens to a people when they allow the spectacular and the powerful to replace the sacred. when they begin measuring greatness by dominion rather than by faithfulness, when the image of God in every human soul is treated as less valuable than the image of power, of wealth, of cultural influence. God did not preserve me because I was the strongest or the wisest or the most capable man of my generation. He preserved me because I walked with him. That phrase, walked with God, is the simplest and most profound description of a human life I have ever encountered. Not conquering for God, not building empires for God, walking with him, day by day, in faithfulness, in humility, in the willingness to look foolish before a world that worships strength. You live in a world filled with its own versions of the mighty ones of old, things that demand your reverence, things that promise power and belonging and significance if you will only give them your devotion. Do not be deceived by their stature. Test everything against the word of the one who set the boundaries of the sea. Walk with him, and when the waters come, and they will come, in whatever form they take in your life, you will find, as I found, that his faithfulness is the only ark that has ever truly held.